When you think of Martin Luther King Jr., what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's the monument, right? The powerful speeches, the I have a dream king. But what if I told you the real man was far more radical, far more dangerous to the status quo than the hero we've kind of sanitized for our national holidays? Today, we're going to meet the man behind the monument.
This is the line. It's the one that defines him for so many people. It's that incredible high point of the March on Washington, a moment of just profound hope that still gives you chills. And look, it's a beautiful, unifying vision that's easy for everyone to embrace. But it's also where the story starts to get a lot more complicated.
Because if we stop right there, with that one famous line from 1963, we miss the whole point. We miss the incredible evolution of his thinking. We miss the man who was forged in the fire of the struggle, who started asking much, much harder questions. So what happened after the dream? And boom! Just 4 years later, a very different king is speaking. This is a man who saw the fight for civil rights as completely tied to the fight against poverty and war. He saw those bombs in Vietnam as an attack on the very soul of America, draining money and resources that could have built a fair society right here at home. This is the journey we're going to explore.
So to understand how he got there, how he became this radical prophet, we've got to go back to the beginning. Back to a young pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, who, believe it or not, never actually wanted the national spotlight.
Yeah, before he was a civil rights icon, he was a scholar, through and through. I mean, look at this. He graduated from Morehouse at just 19 years old, got his PhD from Boston University. His foundation wasn't in street protests. It was in ideas, in theology and philosophy. And that intellectual rigor would end up shaping everything he did.
So when Rosa Parks made her courageous stand, the organizers in Montgomery needed a leader. And they turned to this 26-year-old Dr. King. But not because he was some kind of firebrand. No, it was for the exact opposite reason. He was the new guy in town, a respected intellectual who could unite all the different groups. He was actually the safe choice, not the ambitious one.
And that new role, it took an immediate and absolutely immense toll on him. This doesn't sound like the confident icon we see in the statues, does it? It's the voice of a young man totally crushed by the weight of a movement confessing his deepest doubts. He was terrified they were going to fail. This is the human being behind the hero.
But he didn't quit. And the struggle itself, it forged him into something new. The brutal realities of the fight for justice would sharpen his philosophy, change his tactics, and transform him from a reluctant leader into a seasoned general.
You can literally see the escalation here, step by step. In Montgomery, the demand was actually pretty modest, just more humane treatment on segregated buses. But the violent resistance they faced taught them that wasn't going to be enough. So by the time they get to Birmingham, the goal is to dismantle segregation completely. And by Selma, they understand that real power, lasting power, comes from the right to vote. The struggle itself was their greatest teacher.
Birmingham was the absolute turning point. This is where King and the movement made a strategic and really controversial decision to put children on the front lines of the protests. The response was horrific. The images of fire hoses tearing skin and police dogs attacking marchers, they were broadcast all over the world. It forced the entire nation, and really the world, to look at the ugly, violent truth of segregation.
And through it all, there was this incredible resilience. 381 days. Just think about that for a second. More than a year. Can you imagine the discipline, the sheer determination of an entire community, walking to work in the rain, organizing carpools, just holding the line, day after day after day? King called it their glorious dignity, and it showed the world the unstoppable power of nonviolent resistance. Now, the huge successes in places like Montgomery and Selma led to these landmark victories, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and for most of America, that felt like, okay, job done. But for King, the real fight was just beginning, and it was about to take him far beyond what most people were comfortable with.
Okay, so this is the real disconnect. The myth is a safe, moderate king who only cared about racial harmony in the South. But the reality? Whoa. The real king was building a multiracial coalition to fight for economic justice for all poor people. He was attacking the deep-seated racism of northern cities, and he was becoming one of the loudest critics of the Vietnam War. This was not a moderate reformer. This was a radical.
He had this stark realization, especially after seeing the horrible poverty and housing discrimination in northern cities like Chicago. He realized that the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, as crucial as they were, didn't really cost powerful white America much. Desegregating a lunch counter didn't threaten the basic economic structure of the country. But to get true equality, he now believed, would require a radical redistribution of economic and political power. And that was a much more dangerous idea.
And this was his final, audacious vision, the Poor People's Campaign. This wasn't just going to be another march. It was a plan to bring a multiracial army of the poor, black, white, Hispanic, Native American, to Washington, D.C. to build a shantytown right there on the National Mall. The plan was to engage in massive civil disobedience to, in his words, cripple the operations of an oppressive society until Congress passed an economic Bill of Rights for every American.
As you can imagine, this radical vision made him more enemies than ever before, and it all came at an extraordinary personal price. To really, truly understand the man, we have to look at the immense toll this leadership took on him as a human being.
I mean, just try to imagine this was your daily reality. Constant threats on your life, a relentless smear campaign by your own government. On top of that, crippling bouts of depression. Friends said he even developed a nervous tic from the sheer anxiety. And at times he told them he felt utterly deserted and alone, even while he was leading a global movement.
The pressure from the government was just relentless. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, was obsessed with him. He was convinced King was a communist threat to the United States, so he put the full force of the Bureau into watching him 24/7, tapping his phones, bugging his hotel rooms, determined to destroy him.
And it gets even darker. The FBI didn't just watch him, they actively tried to destroy him. They mailed an anonymous package to his home that had secret audio recordings from his private life and a letter. The message was sinister and crystal clear. Expose yourself, or we will. The letter ended by suggesting there was only one way out for him. It was a blatant attempt to blackmail him into silence, or even suicide. His wife, Coretta Scott King, later revealed just how deep his private struggle went. At what should have been the highest point of his public life, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, he was privately falling apart. The public saw this triumphant global hero, but the people closest to him saw a man in absolute agony.
So where does that leave us? Knowing the full person, the radical, the depressed, the courageous, the flawed man who just kept fighting despite it all, it doesn't diminish his legacy. If anything, it makes it more human, and you could argue even more heroic. The real question for us today is, which king will we choose to remember? The comfortable myth on the monument, or the radical prophet who is still challenging us?